Hello and welcome to Crisis What Crisis, a new podcast series designed to be a useful field guide as we all try to navigate and come to terms with a dramatically changed world. Whether personal, professional or both, crisis is without doubt the new shared experience. I'm Andy Coulson, a former newspaper editor, Downing Street Director of Communications and inmate of HMP Belmarsh. For the last 4 years I've been trying to put all my experience, the good and the bad, to use as a strategic advisor to business leaders. And I can tell you that the bad has been just as useful as the good. And that got me thinking that there are plenty of great podcasts out there where you can hear stories of success. There are far fewer where you can benefit from the experience of those whose lives have properly unravelled. So in Crisis What Crisis, I'll be talking to the embattled, shamed, courageous, ruined, damaged, resilient, unlucky and lucky survivors of crisis. Some names will be familiar, some less so. But our guests will talk about their experiences honestly, often with humour, but always in the hope that what they have to share might be useful to anyone facing down their own demons and challenges. Put simply, these are crisis stories worth sharing. Our guest today is Richard Bacon, one of the sharpest minds in broadcasting. From Blue Peter in his early 20s to creator and exec producer of a new primetime game show in America. And with a truly eclectic mix of radio and TV roles in between, covering entertainment, current affairs and much more. Richard's career here and in the US reflects a talent to be curious and energised by pretty much everything he encounters. But it hasn't been a straightforward journey. In this podcast, we're looking at crisis in all its forms, including high-profile professional unravellings, mental health and addiction issues and near-death experiences. On that basis, this could be the only conversation we need to have because our guest has endured and survived them all. Richard, thanks for joining us today. We're going to talk, of course, about the downsides of crisis and how to navigate the dark days. But let's start with the positives, because crisis is one side of a coin for you. The other side is that energy, drive, that curiosity that served you very well. Do you see it that way?
Definitely see myself as curious. In more ways than one, but I'm just thinking through your very nice intro. I definitely have a lot of energy, and I also definitely am willing to take risks, but they're not always very good risks. You know, they're not calculated risks. They're just risks, and I think if you are that sort of person, then sometimes things will go wrong, and you'll get in trouble. Yeah,
Blue Peter. You've been a
got there already, have we? Okay, sure.
Let's get it out of the way.
Yeah.
We've got to get over the thorny issue of the News of the World as well. You've been a presenter for.
Were you there when I was? Were you at News of the World when I was talking?
I was not.
Weren't, were you?
I was not. I am very relieved to say.
I'll tell you what part you played in my story, which was I was only on Blue Peter for 20 months, but you were editor of the Bizarre column in the Sun, and you had. I kind of forgot about this, but I already had a reputation for going out, drinking a lot. And I was only 21, and I went to loads of parties, and you ran an item about the Blue Peter breathalyzer. Do you remember they had the Blue Peter totalizer?
Yes.
Which, kids would send in milk bottle tops and that kind of thing to raise money for a serious cause. You ran the Blue Peter totalizer, and it had beer bottle tops, and it was about how many times I've been out partying. So in many ways, Andy, you saw it coming.
I tried to warn you.
You should have intervened.
I tried to warn you.
Funny joke, the Blue Peter totalizer, sorry.
Indeed. You'd been a presenter for 18 months or so when you were caught taking cocaine by the News of the World. A scandal erupts, front pages for a few days, and you lose your job. Having to hand back your Blue Peter badge, I understand. A really tough experience for anyone in their early 20s. But more years have passed than the number of months you spent in the job. And yet you still feel the need, I understand, even in America, to tell anyone who might be looking to work with you about it. Why is that?
Because in America, I'm talking to you from Los Angeles, and in America, they find it funny, I suppose. I mean, one, it comes up as soon as you Google it. You feel you want to get there first. Yeah, it's partly about getting there first, isn't it? And I think anyone who has had a very big dominant scandal in their life, then it will always be there in some form. So it's partly about you own it by making a joke about it. It's always a good way to own something is to use humor, and in some ways you can use it to your advantage. In a meeting, it's a story that is quite shocking. It's long enough ago for it not to matter, but if I don't mention it, then they will Google me, and it will seem strange that I didn't mention it. I'm sitting to you in a room in my house, and there's one of those Amazon Alexas next to me. And the other day, my kids said, "Oh, Alexa, who's Richard Bacon?" And it said, he comes up straight away. It goes, "Richard Bacon is an English radio television presenter. He was fired from Blue Peter in 1998 and for taking." And I jumped in. I went, "Alexa, stop! Alexa, stop! Stop!" And then they went, "What are you saying stop for? What do you get fired for?" And I went, "Don't worry about it." And then they asked again. And so it's right there at the surface all the time, even though it's 21 years ago. So
Yeah.
my answer is that when you have something like that you are well known for and that's dominant, then it's important to own it.
Yeah. I mean, other than just now, for which apologies, when was the last time someone actually raised it with you?
Echo. Oh, it's not on. I was going to get it to do it now. Yeah, no, I've got an announcement this week I've signed an overall deal with NBC.
Oh, congratulations.
Thanks. And that's being announced in the next 2 days, I think. Because I have a couple of productions with them and I have another one with ABC. But they said CAA, who are my agents here, Hollywood agents, said, "Oh, can you write as a bio, a resume, as they call it, for the NBC Universal press release?" So I just put it in there because I thought I've got to put it in there.
How interesting. Because on one level, that's kind of bonkers, right? Yeah. I mean, I totally get it, but yeah, for someone listening to this, I think most people listening to this would think to themselves, "My God, it was so long ago," and hardly the greatest transgression in life. No. And there you are, more than 20 years later, wanting to put it into a press release for an announcement that is nothing but yet another, in fact, properly significant step forward in your life.
I mean, let me have a look. I've got the bio I sent to them. I mean, I doubt NBC will actually put it in the press release. Yeah. It's just that I thought I'd.
No, but that you chose to do it is interesting. Yeah. No, look, you bounced back.
This is how I phrased it. He, obviously, I'm talking about myself in the third person. He spent his formative years in the 1990s on the world's longest-running children's television show, Blue Peter. He was famously, spot a typo. He was famously the first presenter ever to be fired, going overnight from being a successful children's television presenter that nobody had heard of to an unsuccessful children's television presenter that everybody had heard of. It's not a bad joke. It's not a bad way of putting it.
It's not a bad joke at all. You bounced back though pretty quickly, didn't you? The Big Breakfast, Top of the Pops, other TV and radio jobs. That scandal would have sunk a lot of people, but even at that age, you clearly had resilience. So where did that come from?
Well, I was always quite proud of the way that I dealt with that scandal psychologically. I remember it's strange to be in the eye of the storms, as you have been. I was just turned 22, I think, when it happened. And as you said at the beginning, it was a big story. It was on the front pages for a few days. And when you're in the eye of the storm, you don't know where the eye is going to sort of settle. You don't know when it's going to calm down, and you don't really know where. It's like there's a hurricane and all the furniture is spinning around. You just don't know what's next and what's around the corner. But I remember being pleased with how I coped with it. And I don't know where that comes from. I couldn't really tell you. But I didn't let it crush me.
Mum and dad? I mean, you terrific childhood.
It definitely comes from my mum and dad. I actually took my mum to therapy recently. And just to cut to the chase of what therapy is all about, right? I just took, they're always like, that Freud quote about if it's not one thing, it's your mother. I was like, I just, instead of wasting,
Did you tell your therapist that you were bringing your mother to?
Well, I was telling about, because I live in LA, so of course I have a therapist. We were talking one day towards the beginning of last year, and I said, and of course she asked me about my mum, and I said, well, she's in LA next week. Why don't I bring her? And she was like, oh, yes, please. She was really excited, and that is so interesting because when you do something like that, you end up listening to your parent in a way that you don't normally. Obviously, your mum and dad's backstory and the beats of it, but you rarely listen to them for an hour talk about their childhood, and certainly not in the company of an expert who knows how to steer the conversation. And so I heard a lot about my mum's own resilience, which is, she's also spent a lot of her life as a kind of big drinker, but she went through a really difficult childhood with an abusive father, and she went through it in so much detail. It was really shocking. And actually, when she was 5 years old, she nearly died. She caught fire. And she caught fire. She was in front of a fire. She was 5. She grew up in a pub in Nottinghamshire, and there's an electric fire, and the flames enveloped her. And her sister got a bowl of lettuce and water from the kitchen and threw it on her face. It's the only reason her face is protected. The rest of her body is still covered in scars. And I remember she was talking about. She said she was in the ambulance with her dad, who was not a very nice guy. She says, I can remember saying to him, Dad, am I going to die? Am I going to die? And then I started crying because I thought about, wow, my daughter's died. Yeah. So it's a profound experience. But actually, yes, to come back to your question, my mum has more resilience than I do and has been through a lot. So it probably does come from your parents. And when I went through that scandal, which is frankly nothing like as bad as what my mum went through when she was 5, it's still, he still only lost a job and been in the newspaper. But I remember, I could deal with it. I just realised I could deal with it, and that allowed me to move on.
The sort of incredibly wise decision, it seems to me, from this distance, is that you decided not to be bitter. I mean, how did you in your early 20s? How did you get to that place? How did you dodge the bitterness bullet?
I consciously thought that I'm not going to be bitter about it. It was a decision, not rather than an instinctive
informed
emotional
by advice or no, something you were able to get to yourself.
I got there myself. I just thought the wise thing would be to not be bitter, and then if you're not bitter about it, you don't get dragged down. And you see people who are bitter about things from their past. I mean, I can think of a couple of famous TV hosts that I'm really good friends with. One in particular who was fired in a big scandal. I'm not going to say who because it's not fair, but he's definitely bitter about it and struggles to talk about it now. And I spent hours and hours and hours with him, and he's just not very good at opening up about it or talking about it or making jokes about it, even though he's a funny man. And so that's what you don't want.
Yeah.
He
does not put it into his press releases.
He's not had a press release for a while, Andy, but no, I don't suppose he would. I think again, you come back to what we just talked about, which is owning it, and making jokes about it. That also stops you being bitter about it. If you don't talk about it properly, I mean, that's true of many things in life, isn't it? Of problems that you go through. Can be a relationship problem, can be a mistake that you've made, it can be a scandal you caught up in, it can be an accident you had. Yeah. If you don't talk about it, then we know, there's plenty of evidence that is psychologically unhealthy. So I talked about it, made jokes about it, was open about it, and that helped me not be bitter. But I consciously, as I said earlier, decided not to be bitter.
Yeah. How did what happened?
Are you bitter about what happened to you?
No, and that's why I asked the question, because I think it's if it's not the key, it's certainly a key element. Because whenever I've had plenty of bitter days, and I've always felt worse after. Yeah, bitterness for me always sent me backwards, not forwards.
So how did you banish the bitterness when you felt it on a bitter day?
Well, mine was fairly long running, and similar to your situation in that, you had journalists camped out your door, and you had high profile. I don't think I was really in a position to to kind of get angry about any of that at all. Certainly not bitter. I was a national newspaper editor, for crying out loud. So, I was able to get perspective pretty quickly, really. And a lot of the stuff that would be difficult for most people to deal with was a bit easier for me because I'd been a journalist and because the jobs that I'd done, I was able to get my head around it pretty quickly. A lot of that stuff that causes bitterness, I was very quickly, I was able to get.
But you ended up with a particularly harsh punishment that I assume you think was too harsh, and the consequences for your family were enormous. And I mean, the consequences for my mum and dad were pretty big.
Yeah,
but it's that's the thing, isn't it? It's I think it was worse for my dad than for me.
You said, I think, that your dad was your dad was probably affected by it, and as you'd expect any father to be, right?
Yeah,
we underestimate how much this stuff affects our parents, obviously.
Well, he's a lawyer, and so I'd broken the law publicly, and it's very difficult for him. And he cried in the shower, and he turned the shower on so that my mum wouldn't hear him cry. And that was the first time she'd heard him cry. So, and probably she hasn't heard it since. So it was very significant for them. And certainly I felt, quite a lot of shame when my mum told me that story, which wasn't until a couple of years later. In a way, that was the worst I ever felt about it, when she told me that story a long time afterwards. Because I hadn't really thought about those consequences.
Yes. How do you think it sort of impacted you in the years after? Because you do, as I mentioned, you got back on your feet pretty quickly. You were back on TV. How did it sort of manifest itself, do you think, in say the next sort of 5 years or so?
Yeah, I got thrown off Blue Peter, and then I went to work on this show called The Big Breakfast, where you just had to come up with ideas all the time. You weren't just a host for hire. And it really taught me that I love ideas. Then I went to work at XFM, where I just filled my shows out with ideas. And then I diverted essentially into news and current affairs, 5 Live for quite a long time. And I really enjoyed working there. And I did a bit of kind of current affairs type hosting here in America. But what I've come back to, and I'm hosting a couple of these game shows I've created, but what I've really circled back to in my life now is coming up with ideas and writing ideas. The NBC overall deal is about writing ideas. And it was being on The Big Breakfast that taught me and showed me that that's what I like to do. That was only on that show.
With Ed, of course.
Yeah, with Ed, of course. Yeah, of course. With Ed Forsyth was the exec producer, who you were really good friends with.
Yeah,
I remember.
His wife, yeah.
Did I meet you at his 40th? I think I did, didn't I?
We did.
Remember his 40th?
I do remember his 40th. Yeah.
He literally threw me out. I mean, literally, because I was the last to leave, and he said he got to go.
We should explain that Ed was the producer there, and a brilliant bloke. Enormously talented TV producer, but who sadly died far too young. Losing a friend like that, and he was a good friend of yours. Perspective there, right?
Yeah, definitely. And he had various types of cancer, I think, and had no idea, and he just dropped dead. And I don't know how old he was. I certainly went to his 40th, so he can't have been more than 44 or something. It's only that long after that. So, but he was a very creative guy, Oxbridge guy. The big shows like The Big Breakfast had these really clever people who went to work at really shallow television, and it was just that brilliant fusing of clever people inside, a cartoon world. And he also taught me that I like creating ideas. So the route that I've taken, even to what I'm doing now, all this time later, is sort of a consequence of getting thrown off Blue Peter.
You've described yourself as an addict, but you stayed away from rehab.
Yeah,
I get the impression that you consider, the sort of not management, but the understanding of, you know, whatever issues you have, whatever issues anyone has, is a sort of ongoing process. That there isn't somewhere where you can go to get it fixed. It's a if it's part of your life, it's part of your life, and you should kind of be interested in it and fully immersed in it. Is that your view? Because you're pro therapy, but you're not personally, you're not against rehab, but you're not personally pro rehab. Is that right?
Yeah, I've not been. Yeah. I mean, I go through periods of thinking I should drink or not drink, and periods of just giving up altogether, and periods of just really enjoying it. It's quite hard not to drink during lockdown. Like, just it'd be quite hard not to drink at all at the moment.
Yeah,
when there's really nowhere to go and not that much to do. But it is. Yes, it's a type of addiction. It's not a dependency. It's not like I wake up in the morning and think, well, I need to have an alcoholic drink. It's just that I like it. And I drink too quickly. People who drink too quickly can be a problem. And so I've had periods of AA and not AA, and drinking and not drinking. I guess rehab. In the end, I guess I haven't fully made the decision to stop forever, and without really committing to that, there's not much point in going there.
Yeah, you've described yourself as a sort of run towards addict rather than a runaway addict, which I think is a very powerful way of putting it. That you're at your most vulnerable when things are great.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's still the case. There's some good news.
Yeah.
Then I'll be like, really want to drink and really, enjoy myself. And again, I've actually been going through a really good period lately of selling things and stuff happening. So there's been quite a bit of that, but it's very much, I remember someone saying to me once, what is it, when you're going to have a big night or whatever. I don't really have big nights anymore, but when I did that, someone would say, I remember someone saying to me, what are you running away from? I said, no, I'm not running away from anything. And I brought this point up with my therapist, and we discussed this. No, I'm not running away. I'm running towards. And there's definitely an assumption that if you're dealing with someone, or someone who likes to drink and drinks quickly, or has been in trouble in the past or whatever, that what is this trauma? What is this childhood trauma that you're running away from? What are the problems in your life and in your marriage and in your work? And are you in debt? And they go, no, none of those things. I'm just trying to go even faster. And
that's what it is. That's how you would characterize it.
Definitely.
Wanting to go faster.
Yeah. Most vulnerable when things are at their best.
So 2018 was a challenging year, to put it mildly, for you. Early in 2018, you're diagnosed with ADHD. Which would be a difficult thing for anyone to get their head around. You're told, I know this only from what I've read. I'm told that you sit down with the doctor and he tells you that in fact you're dangerous, and credits Rebecca, your wife, with having saved your life. By managing what neither of you knew then was a disorder. How having explained that there are deep positives about your nature and your character, how did you so quickly, get your head around, understand, that dangerous bit, that chaotic bit?
It was partly how it was explained to me, but it was also, as you said at the very beginning, I'm curious. And so in discovering a bit about this, I became curious about it. So I was keen to learn what it meant. And it was my LA therapist said, you've clearly got ADHD. My therapist has got ADHD. And he was like, you should go and have a proper diagnosis. So I went to Orange County and to his the Amen clinic, which is an ADHD clinic, and you go through this long checklist and they scan your brain and various things happen. and there are many different types of ADHD. What was so interesting was you can see it as a physical manifestation. That I had a brain scan, and you have lower blood flow to the front of the brain, to the prefrontal cortex, and a lot of ADHD drugs like Ritalin and Adderall are stimulants. It's why a lot of people with ADHD, it turns out, take cocaine. See, that was something I learned as well, which is that my past use of that drug had been may have been related to that. It's hard to say categorically.
But you're trying to sort of subconsciously rewire.
But sort of what the stimulant does is it essentially speeds up the blood flow at the front of the brain that has slowed down. And when you look at the brain scan, that bit in the brain is a darker patch than it is on other people. So that was fascinating. But it's definitely not made up ADHD. My mum was a bit skeptical about it. Like it was, everyone's got that these days, I think was her response. As in, I think she thinks parents use it as an excuse if their kid's like not very good in class. I think my mum just thinks that's what parents, they just say, oh, my kid's got ADHD.
Yeah.
Without really considering.
So no, mum. Let me show you.
It's a real thing. It's a real thing. And some of those parents, a lot of those parents would say that we're telling the truth and they'll be onto something. And I did some interviews about ADHD at the time, and every few days on Twitter now, I'll get someone else will say to me that they've been diagnosed or their kids been diagnosed as a consequence of me talking about it, which I like, and I'll engage in a conversation with them about it. But it's, he said to me that you are dangerous, you're lucky to be alive, and then I did nearly die straight after that anyway. And then he said, yes, he pointed to Rebecca and he said, you might have read the interview more recently than me, Andy. I can't remember the exact quote now. But
no, he said that she'd saved your life.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, this woman has.
So you were lucky. You were lucky to have got to 42, because life was so chaotic.
Yeah, and Rebecca definitely doesn't have ADHD, and is very steady, and. There's an element of me that will always be chaotic, but I think without her there, I think you were trying to say, without her, without that influence to kind of counterbalance you to a degree, then you would probably be dead. And I think that's true.
So you're dealing with this. You're working this out, both you and Rebecca, and then you fly back to the UK in July, so just a few months later. You feel a bit rough on the plane, struggling to breathe. You leave the plane in a wheelchair, but rather than going to hospital, you go home. You get worse, and then you're in an Uber on your way to Lewisham Hospital. Tell us what happened then.
Well, I went to the front desk and I said that I was short of breath, and then they took it very seriously, because it is, as we know from the COVID era, that that is a very serious condition. I didn't know it was very serious. I didn't really understand. I just thought I was short of breath and it'll go away. And they rushed me through. I remember them saying, we haven't got our full complement of doctors here today. And I remember saying, oh, well, that must be down to, I think I said, oh, typical NHS underfunding. And they said, no, one of our doctors is Dr. Alex, and he's on Love Island, so he's not available today. It's like, God, I already don't like the show. And they did a chest X-ray, and then they saw that both my lungs were filling up with an infection, very dramatically, that I'd somehow caught in Los Angeles. It was never clear what it was, and they had to induce me into a coma. And the gap between them saying that I needed to be in the coma and actually being in the coma was only 4 minutes. And then, they said, call who you need to call. So I called the chief exec of Fortnum & Mason, said I couldn't make a dinner in their boardroom. I called Nick Jones of Soho House to tell him to give my tickets away for the House Festival. I still wasn't taking it that seriously. Right. And then...
Rebecca's with you?
Yeah, she's with me. And then I called my mum and dad. Then she called her sister. And then she started crying. And then it felt very dramatic. And then they put me in a coma. And Rebecca rubbed my feet and said, don't walk towards the white light. And then I went in. And then I nearly died. I mean, they told me afterwards that they very much, Vic, the lead consultant, to whom I recently gave an award, said, "Oh no, we expected you to die. My blood oxygen went below 60, and if you go below 60, if you go below 70, you're in trouble, and if you go below 60, then you get brain damage or die." And so I went to 58. So no one's ruling out the brain damage bit. And I turned blue. And I remember him saying, they were all standing around me on the trolley, and I'm on life support and asleep. And he said, "You're about to die. You went to 58 and you blew." And I looked up at another doctor, and he said, I was about to say to her, "Get the crash equipment." He said, but I didn't need to say it. I just looked at her, and she put her hand on the trolley, which had the crash equipment on it, and she just slid it next to your body. So we got the crash equipment ready to jolt you. But it was not a question of, that was really going to save you. You were going to die. And then
was Rebecca there?
Well, she was in like a waiting room.
Yeah,
she was at Lewisham Hospital.
Yeah,
and they were making it clear to her that it was very dangerous. And then somehow I got out of it. And I don't know how close to death I was, but the impression I get is seconds, really, because I had turned blue, I'd gone below 60, and they got the crash equipment next to me and powered it up, ready to use it for, in other words, for cardiac arrest. And as I've described it to you, is exactly how Vic described it to me when I went back to the hospital to visit him sometime later. So I think I assume that's seconds away from dying, really. I don't think sliding the crash equipment next to you, you've gone into 58 blood oxygen and turned blue, is like, oh, this is a few minutes or what. I was in the coma for 9 days, and I came round, and it was the worst experience of my life. They put so many different types of drugs into me that I was hallucinating. I thought a nurse tried to kill me. They put me back in a second coma. It was awful. I remember being in an Itsu in Chelsea, and this guy came in, and he's a minister of I think it's called the Chelsea and Brompton Church, or he's a minister of that church. He came up to me and he went, he said, "I led a number of prayers for you because it was in the newspapers, I was in a coma." And he was a very sweet guy, and I started talking to him. I'm not a religious person, but it was fantastic talking to him. And he explained to me, he said, "You will have this," he said, after 3 months, "this tail will whip round and smack you in the face." And he said that, and I explored that more with other people after he said it, and quite a lot of people said the same thing. And it never came. Never happened.
You think it won't
and I'm
come?
Sure
because that tail can be a long tail.
Did you have that?
Yeah, to a degree. Yeah, mine was sort of 5 years start to finish. So yeah, it can. Yeah, it can revisit you when you least expect it. Let's put it that way. But but I think
still less than 2 years ago. So I don't know. I mean,
yeah. But you're both in terms of this challenge, but the other challenges in your life, your strategy seems to be, and that's what this podcast is all about, right? It's trying to work out what are the strategies to deal with crisis in all its forms. Your strategy, it seems to me, is to fully immerse yourself in it, right? It's to fully understand. That's the journalist in you, is ask every question, know every detail, sort of properly kind of submerge yourself in it. And that is your sort of device for managing through. Is that accurate?
Yeah. It's to talk about it a lot is what I would say I do. I'm trying to remember something. There was a therapist in London I saw after the coma, and Rebecca came as well. What did she say? I know what she said. She said that because I was already making jokes about it and talking about it like almost immediately. And she said, what you're doing is you're almost by turning it into a story, whether that's a story as a journalist in me, because I've done a lot of current affairs in my life, and also the presenter in me who likes to just tell an anecdote. She said you're kind of putting it over there so that you are in some ways disassociating with it by turning it into an anecdote, which you feel this compulsion to keep telling, it's almost like it's happened to someone else, and you're almost talking about it in the as if it didn't happen, but it's moving it away and controlling it.
And her analysis of that was an unhealthy thing to do, or that was a good device.
It was both. She said it's good and bad, and that it has upsides and downsides.
Yeah.
And that's going to obviously depend. It's going to be specific person to person, incident to incident. But no, it wasn't. You might think it's all bad, but no, that's not what she said. It is a coping mechanism to turn something into a story that means that you're almost looking down upon it instead of it being inside you.
Yeah.
And also, if you're the sort of person that likes telling stories, then it suits you to do that.
Yes.
I think Rebecca was very confused by how much I was talking about it when I came out of the coma. And we went back to her mum's house in Blackheath. That's why I was in Lewisham, because her mum lives in Blackheath. And are you from around there? If I imagine that.
No, I did live in, not anymore, but I used to live in South East London. Yeah, not far from there.
Okay, that's it. Yeah, I came to your house there, didn't I?
That's right.
You did a great fish on a barbecue. Remember that?
Well remembered.
And
it's the only time I've done a great fish on a barbecue.
It was complex, but you had loads of stuff on it. It was very complex the way you did it, but it was beautiful. Remember it to this day. And I went back to Blackheath, and like day 2, Radio 4 came around to interview me. And I think Rebecca, that still annoys her to this day. She was like, "Why would you get an interview around to talk to Radio 4?" And I said, "Well, it been in quite a lot of newspapers. When we left Lewisham, the photographers there taking photos and stuff. So I said, well, I just want to own this, like Blue Peter, isn't it? I said, I want to own the story, so I'll own it." I think in the end, that probably wasn't a very good interview because I was mentally all over the shop, but I definitely wanted to
that was part of
tell
the process,
a story, part of the process.
Yeah.
And it's not just about broadcasting it or telling it to people. I enjoy telling it to people, but it was definitely about psychologically the coping mechanism of you move it over there by turning it into an anecdote.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, of course, the person to answer the key question, on your very close brush with death is Rebecca herself, because she was living when you were in a coma. She was living every second of it, right? With worrying about Arthur and Ivy and the rest of your family. I mean, she was there, living, breathing every single moment of it. How do you think how does she reflect on it now from this distance?
Well, it was definitely worse for her, because in a way that the Blue Peter thing was worse for my dad. It was worse for her because I was asleep and she's living through it minute to minute, going back to her mum's in Blackheath, thinking the phone might go in the middle of the night to say that I've died. But Rebecca's really robust and dealt with it, and we had therapy together. She had therapy separately, and she's tough, Rebecca. She's too tough in lots of ways. I mean, she's like, I can't really. She's just strong. You can't run rings around her. You can't play psychological tricks on her. There's an innate toughness in her, and I don't know where that comes from in her.
Yeah,
but it was awful for her, but she's very much back to normal. And as far as I can tell, and I think as far as she can tell, she didn't get that that whip either. And it'd be a good question to say to her. I was half hoping she'd walk past his bedroom, but she hasn't done. What's a sort of longer lasting impact for you?
Yeah,
because she would have an answer.
Yeah,
but I honestly don't know what that answer is. But she dealt with it brilliantly.
I should also point out at this point that your crisis credentials extend to sort of Nostradamus-like predictions, because, of course, over a year ago, you were campaigning against the lack of intensive care beds in the UK, which is something that has found itself in the news, if I can put it that way.
I know. Yeah, that's true. And it was that was a consequence of my time at Lewisham. Really, I'll tell you what else I have is that I'm an optimist in many ways. And I think being an optimist is a bit of a pain because my dad's an optimist, and in very sort of trivial ways. He'll set off too late for everything, but assume it'll be fine and he'll get there on time. And that extends through financial management and, all sorts of things in our family where it's like, everything, it'll be fine.
Yeah.
And being an optimist isn't as good as isn't all it's cracked up to be, really. And you could do with more pessimism in your life than I've got. But the optimism in me also means that when I go through something bad, I'll see the kind of positive in it. And so meeting those people at Lewisham was fantastic, getting to know them, getting to understand ICU.
Yes.
Having them explain to me the lack of intensive care beds, which I then gave some interviews about, one on Good Morning Britain, and spoke about it. It gave me an insight into that world. And because I'm curious, as you said at the start of this interview, when they tell me about this stuff, I'm immediately like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And then I'm very happy to go and talk about it. But there is underfunding in intensive care beds, as we've now discovered, and there will be more pandemics and there'll be more massive crises. And I do hope that one of the legacies of this is that we have to be much more prepared than we think we need to be for when these things hit. You can't have just enough beds. You can't go, on average, there's 25 people in ICU on a normal night, so let's have 35. That's not enough, and then we'll cut some of them back. Yeah. The capacity has to be so much more than that for when things go really wrong, and things will go really wrong again.
We're talking as lockdown begins to ease. For how long, of course, we'll see. How have you coped? I'm interested in how someone who's had so much sort of chaos in their life reacts when crisis becomes everyone's life.
That's a good phrase, and a good question. I have FOMO, so it's the good thing about lockdown is it takes away your FOMO, because there's nothing you're missing out on. Like, there's just nothing there. What's happening at his house?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't go to that dinner party. Oh, there's a Soho House opening I didn't get to. There's nothing happening. Yeah. So it's a reduction of FOMO. To see everyone in crisis is, how do I feel about it? I just feel on a personal level very sad for a lot of people. A lot of my friends are restaurateurs, and I don't know how they're going to get through this. And I don't know, even if they have to reopen with tables 2 meters apart, I don't know how businesses on tight margins are going to survive. So I don't know. My answer is just one of, I hope, empathy. But it's weird lockdown, isn't it? Because you have days that you really enjoy. And, the news is terrible. The death rate. You have friends whose businesses are struggling. But you will still have a day of this complete calm where you've got closer to your family. Yeah. Spent more time looking into the eyes of your kids than normal.
Yes. Time you probably wouldn't have had otherwise.
Yeah. It's a funny one emotion, isn't it?
It is.
You can have a great day and then feel a bit guilty about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a very, very strange experience.
Yeah. Well, my kids, as you know, are a bit older than yours, and I've been gifted, another 2.5 months of having dinner with them every night. That wouldn't have happened otherwise. My oldest is off at uni. My middle son's about to. So that's a huge prize, right?
It's a huge prize. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that actually, because of course my kids are only 6 and 8, so we live with them all the time.
Look, we've taken up enough of your time. Thanks so much. I've just got one more question for you, if I may. We're asking every guest to give us their crisis cures. 3 things, can't be another person, but 3 things that they kind of lean on, or that they. It could be a particular book, or it might be somewhere you go, or something you do. The only rule is that it can't be another person.
Well, if it's a dark day, I wouldn't drink, because as we discussed earlier, I run towards fun, and I'm celebratory, and that's obviously quite useful. I think if you're going through a dark day, the thing is to not drink, because that can very quickly bring out anger.
Is there a book or a piece of music or a
Well, more music-wise, I have a thing that really truly makes me happy, especially on a darker day if I'm feeling down. Is I have a 1979 Marantz amp, 1975 floor speakers, and a turntable, and I play vinyl, and it's just a thing that it's the best thing I've ever bought in a lot of ways. And I play a vast range of things on there, but I often play 60s bands, whether it's, you know, The Who or the Kinks or the Beatles or the Stones. Or, you know, I play Fleetwood Mac a lot, and I play more recent music too, but nothing makes me happier than putting on a piece of vinyl. I just love everything about it. I love the way it feels, I love the way it sounds a bit crackly. I love watching it turn. I love the fact you're hearing the album in the right order. You know, a Spotify playlist, that's not how the band intended you to hear their song. You hear it in the right order. You hear a Beatles song, the way it sounded then, in its correct order. I even like turning the fucking thing over, you know. And so that makes me
now as a place. I'm guessing that because I know that you're as big a fan of Soho House as I am. That there's a particular Soho House, a hotel, a place that kind of, when, you know, times have been tough, as you've kind of helped you through.
I mean, well, of the Soho houses, Babington would definitely be one. I mean, I got married at Babington, and it, you know, it still retains this kind of magic quality to it. But it's kind of hard not to go there and do anything other than feel much better. Good,
Richard. Thanks so much.
Okay, great. Thanks, Andy.
Thanks for your time. Thanks for being so frank with us. An incredibly kind of useful conversation on the subject of crisis. So thanks very much.
Great. No, I really enjoyed it. I like talking about it for the reasons we've already discussed. You know, that all these things are, you know, I think it's healthy if you can talk about it, you enjoy talking about them, then you should. So I think it's a good thing, and I think I don't know whether talking about it is useful to other people, but it's certainly useful to me. So it was great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Crisis What Crisis. Do feel free to send us your feedback. You'll find our contact details and our show notes giving you the key insights from our guests at crisiswhatcrisis.com. There are more useful conversations on the way, so please do subscribe. And if you like what you hear, give us a rating and a review. It really helps. Thanks again.